Do you have anything that is gold, perhaps dishware, your teeth? Either way, you probably look upon these things with some value because of the sums that gold often fetches. This is no new phenomenon. Gold has been a valuable resource for centuries. In fact, several sub-Saharan African kingdoms and empires were built almost entirely upon the wealth they accumulated from gold resources. In this lesson, we'll examine three principal African empires of the High Middle Ages: Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. First of all, we should note that when we speak of Ghana or Mali in this lesson, that these historical kingdoms have no connection to the modern states of Ghana or Mali, though current West African leaders sometimes symbolically harken back these to the kingdoms. In reality, the Ghana and Mali of previous centuries had far different borders and political apparatuses, and there is virtually no continuity between the historical kingdoms of Ghana and Mali and the current countries of those names. The gold trade that was integral to the growth of these kingdoms began sometime in the 4th and 5th century CE, when Berber-speaking people who lived in the North Africa established trade routes across the sub-Saharan desert to West Africa. The Berbers utilized camels that would carry large loads and trek hundreds of miles without the need to stop for water, the perfect pack animal for a trip through the desert. In addition, Berber travelers took advantage of natural desert springs called oases as natural refueling stations where they would take a rest and take on more water. The Berbers traded North African and Mediterranean goods with sub-Saharan Africans for gold, which they then took back and sold to the Mediterranean traders. After a few centuries, stories began to spread of magnificent African kings and courts of the sub-Saharan region that were so rich that even their pets were adorned with gold jewelry. The demand for gold from these regions grew alongside with wealth and stature of the African culture. Unfortunately, these cultures did not keep great records, and much of what we know about them comes from Arab and Mediterranean traders who traveled and journeyed across the Sahara to these regions. As such, the first empire we know much about began sometime between 8th and 10th century CE, when the trans-Saharan gold traders were vibrant. Through various tribes existed Sonikita tribe that truly instigated the Ghanaian Empire. In Ghana, the king was the absolute ruler and the general of the military. Most offices, including regional authorities, were all appointed by the king, and there was nothing resembling democracy. The king was also the judge and jury as well, and most of his days were spent sitting in judgment as the common folk came to voice their complaints and accuse others of a crime. The king would listen to both sides before making a final judgment. The kings of Ghana expanded the Ghanaian territory in its first few centuries of existence, largely because of the wealth they accumulated in the trans-Saharan trade. Indeed, Ghanaian kings taxed traders both on the goods that they brought into West Africa and those that they took out. In addition, the goods they traded for their gold, things like salt, horses, and cloth, were sorely needed in the area and made the Ghanaians the biggest political and economic force in the region. Wealth, however, always attracts others. Before long, there were neighboring tribes, groups vying for the Ghanaian control and the gold trade. In the 11th century, for example, an Arab group known as the Almoravids momentarily captured the Ghanaian capital and forced the Ghanaian kings to pay tribute. This period drastically weakened the control of the Ghanaian kings, and by the middle of the 13th century, they had lost all regional power. The Mali Empire. The state that supplanted the Ghanaians was Mali. Malian kingdom rose around the same time as the Ghanaian kingdom, but did not gain the same regional prominence until after the fall of the Ghanaians in the 13th century. Indeed, the 13th century was the Malian kingdom's heydays after the rise of Suata Kita. Kita is perhaps the most fabled ruler in the Malian history, and he led his tribe, the Mende, in a revolt against the then ruling tribe of Mali around 1200. After defeating the former ruling tribe, Kita consolidated most military and political power in Mali in himself and the Malian monarchy. Under Kita, the subsequent rulers, Mali's territory expanded, and by the middle of the 13th century had eclipsed Ghana as the premier power in the West Africa. Unlike their predecessors, Malian kings did not have total autocratic control over all its territories. Instead, Mali ruled the 12 doors of Mali, referring to the various semi-independent states and cities in the Malian kings either ruled directly or those who had sworn allegiance to the Malian kings. At the height of the 14th century, Mali ruled far more territories than Ghana ever had, and its holding stretches from the Atlantic coast across to the Sahel to Timbuktu and beyond. Mali, like Ghana, profited from burgeoning trade, Saharan gold trade, imposed taxes upon all goods which entered and left the country. Perhaps the most fabled story of the Malian king is that of Musa, a feared king of the 14th century who purported rode into Cairo with 1,325 of his enormous caravan laden with thousands of pounds of gold. His voyage upset the natural ebb and flow of the trans-Saharan trade, and the price of gold subsequently crashed. Mali was at the height of its power and territory in the 14th century. It went into a long, slow decline after the rule of Mansa Musa, before ceasing to exist in the middle of the 17th century. The Songhai Empire. Another important African state of the period was the Songhai. During the 8th century, the Songhai people built the city of Gao in Sahel, which eventually became their imperial capital. Prior to the rise of the Songhai, they spent a period of time as one of the 12 doors of the Malian Empire before Mali's decline. Mali's slow decline allowed the Songhai to rise to prominence, and their empire at its height was larger than Ghana's or Mali's. Indeed, in 1375, Gao was one of the first cities to challenge Malian rule. Many of the victories, including taking of Timbuktu, the largest city in the Malian Empire, were conducted by the Songhai's first emperor, Suni al-Bia. The emperors that followed Bear consolidated power in the imperial throne and expanded Songhai's territory further, while also maintaining peace and stability within their own territory. This lasted for as much of the 16th century until civil war broke out in 1591, and much of the Songhai's territory, including the ever important gold fields, was conquered by the opportunists invading the army of Morocco through various tribes and other groups. Lesson summary. Prior to the colonization of Africa by Europe in the modern period, various empires and states existed in Africa. In West Africa, the three most important empires were Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and all of them profited tremendously from the trans-Saharan gold trade. Ghana was the earliest to rise to prominence, and its rulers maintained central authority over all of its territory and used the goods it got through the trans-Saharan trade to transform itself into the premier regional power. The Malians supplanted the Ghanaians in the middle of the 13th century. Rulers like Suandita Kita and Mansa Musa expanded the Mali territory until it was larger than the Ghana's before a slow, centuries-long decline ended Mali's rule of the region. The Songhai Empire's first expansion from their capital city, Goa, was at the expense of the weakened Mali Empire, and their territory holdings were eventually larger than that of Mali or Ghana until civil war irreparably weakened the empire. Thank you very much for listening.